Okay, man, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Now, come on, now crank this motherfucker up.
Break it down like this.
Hello, Internet. Gino, that Gino Greco here again with another episode of Deep Listens, and today we're doing a little new series, something a little bit different than what we've done in the past. You see, coming up soon, we're going to be picking a specific horror game following our playthrough of Get in the Car Loser. It's my pick, and I know what we're picking. And so I thought it would be cool to look at a movie that influenced the game we're going to play. The game I'm going to pick is spoilers for those. This is really a check to see who listens to the Off-Week podcast. I'm going to be picking Silent Hill 2, which I have never played. But in order to prepare for that and to kind of get familiar with some of the foundational material, some of the media that influenced that game, I thought it'd be cool to do a deep dive into Jacob's Ladder, a movie that you may or may not know was a very, very direct influence on the Silent Hill franchise, to the point where there are like a number of shot-for-shot, like almost shot-for-shot recreations in the Silent Hill games of scenes from Jacob's Ladder. And so in order to kind of understand where that horror series that we're going to be touching on soon kind of got some of its inspirations and where it got some of its tonal, musical cues, its kind of visual language, we decided to take a look at a movie, Jacob's Ladder, that did all that. So this is a new series. We're calling it Deep Dives. And the idea is, sometimes when the moment calls for it, we will do a deep dive into some of the foundational works prior to playing a game that is influenced by them, so that y'all can have kind of a little bit more context, a little bit of a better understanding of where this media comes from. Because not every single piece of media, almost no piece of media, springs fully formed from the head of Zeus. Artists are being influenced by other artists. They are seeing things, they are hearing things just like you and I. And so seeing that through line kind of helps us put into context the works that we are seeing and experiencing. So to help me on this deep dive, I am joined by M. Palladino. Hello, M.
Hello. I'm not usually a horror person. This movie is a weird one. And I also never played Silent Hill 2 because it was for a system that I never had as a kid. So I'm looking forward to it. This is a good warm-up for that.
And I am also joined by Chris ZombiePie Redacted. Hey, ZP.
Do. Can confirm. I have mind melded with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I am now tapping into the hardware of the New World Order. Will be reporting to my next station 001002. A pizzeria at a local New York township, and I will be helping a cabal do some otherworldly stuff, such as feasting on the blood of children.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So you got your third booster shot?
Yes.
Oh.
Okay.
I was wondering what we were getting at.
I was going to start just asking. So what New York township? Are we talking like Mamaroneck? Are we in upstate? Are we in Cold Spring? Montauk?
Tarrytown.
Montauk.
Ah, damn, we're on Long Island. Fuck that place. Well, this is who we've got. And how are you dealing with your third shot? I'm sure very few listeners have had their third shot yet. How was it? Was it more like the first shot, the second shot?
It was more like the second, but it was faster. I think I'm finally turning the corner on that, while also consulting with George Soros about cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
And how we will assist the lizard people in terms of ascending to the highest level of evolution.
They got you on the blockchain.
Yeah, they got me on the blockchain. I was way worse, let's say yesterday, when we did a live viewing session of this movie.
Yeah, we did a watch party in the Discord.
Which is a good segue. Which you can join. You can join
Good segue.
future watch parties.
You could be in the watch party if you go to patreon.com/deeplistens and support the show. $1. It's so cheap. Any amount will get you access to the Discord, which will give you access to our chats, any of our game nights, any our various channels where you can communicate with the host of the show, suggest us games, all sorts of stuff. We have taken suggestions for games from there before, and you might even find out what we're doing ahead of time. And you can also get in touch with the show at deeplistenspod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com, where you have our comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. Worth mentioning now, the Twitter account is automatically sending out links to the show when it goes live. So now the Twitter account is a good follow to know immediately when the show goes up as well.
Yay. We got it running, and we can talk to you on there if
That's
you
true.
comment on it.
Send your questions.
Yeah.
Take questions.
Some podcast apps do not give you the alert when a podcast goes live. So
So,
Twitter can
also,
be your RSS feed.
anybody who joins any amount, you can suggest a future game for play for the Off the Deep End podcast. We have 0 standards. Currently recovering from playing a boring Lord of the Rings RPG that will go unnamed. But you could suggest future entries in this horrible, ill-conceived adventure and folly by donating money to the Patreon.
See, I considered doing that for the main show, and then I was like, oh no, then people will suggest garbage. But I'm glad that we have you to draw fire for us.
Yeah,
Thank you for
really,
drawing aggro.
it's going to be a real
Yeah.
problem when someone finally suggests like a $60 game, and it's like, fuck.
No. Now I have to play the latest Call of Duty and talk about it.
Nope. Numbers have to go up. That's our standard. But the loose standard for what is an RPG is, can you put points and do numbers go up?
Well, I mean, you rank up, and that unlocks better guns. Does that count?
So the multiplayer is an RPG, but the single player is not. That's
So what you're saying is
You're-
someone could totally do that to you. They could say Call of Duty multiplayer.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, Deep Listens is going to have to cover Fortnite. You can keep plugging your ears and singing la 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 la, but
We played.
you're gonna have to play Fortnite.
We covered Overwatch. We covered Terraria. We
You did
covered
PUBG.
PUBG. We basically covered Fortnite at that point, right? By their powers combined.
Does Terraria fall under that?
You
I
build
guess
things.
the building
You
part.
build stuff. It's basically the same. Well, we will eventually. No one has to. No one can make us play Fortnite. We will maybe play Fortnite if someone picks it at some point, but I'm not gonna pick it. Em, are you ever gonna pick it? You'd be more likely to pick Apex Legends than.
Yeah, I would.
Valorant. Let's play Valorant.
I don't know. Maybe I'll hang that over your head, the sort of Damocles style, and
I keep threatening off the deep ends. I want to play Borderlands. Let's talk about Tiny Tina.
Fuck you. That's a terrible. How dare you?
did we
How
ever
dare you
play
threaten
Borderlands?
people? No, we
No.
haven't. I've played Borderlands before, and that game sure was from the early 2010s. Well, without further ado, let's get into Jacob's Ladder. So we're going to approach this a little bit differently than some of the other podcasts that we've done, because in previous podcasts, we usually will kind of go through plot beat by plot beat. We'll do a little bit of that when it's appropriate, but we're largely going to be covering larger themes because this is a 30-year-old movie that you can go out and watch, and the plot is not necessarily the most impactful part of Jacob's Ladder. Like, a lot of it's the tone, I think. The tone and the symbols. Like, the linear plot is not as interesting as the implications of the linear plot.
Okay, that I would agree with, definitely.
It's another one of those things that's very much about the vibes as opposed to making sense of the scene-to-scene narrative.
Yes.
And when it tries to explain everything, it starts to kind of fumble the ball, but we'll talk more about it.
It's largely to its detriment when it starts explaining things.
Which is a horror trope, if ever there's ever been one.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The unmaking of M. Night Shyamalan's career. So this movie to give kind of a rough plot summary, it stars Jacob Singer, who is a Vietnam War vet It begins with him and his troop getting attacked in the jungles of Vietnam. We don't know anything other than they've gone under attack. And as soon as the attack begins, stuff starts going sideways. People start convulsing for no reason. They're shooting, but we don't know who they're shooting at. Jacob runs away from the fight and gets stabbed by a bayonet and kind of starts to lose consciousness. And the next scene, we see him wake up on a subway train in New York City, specifically in Brooklyn. And from this moment on, we are kind of following Jacob through his life in Brooklyn, but everything is not as it appears. So what did we think of kind of that initial framing? You know, we get the Vietnam scene, and then we go straight into New York City. What did we think of the Vietnam scene specifically? Like, I think the opening shot, we get helicopters flying over the jungle, and we get a slow kind of dramatic piano playing.
Yeah. I thought that this was the introduction to the game, the film score. I'm going to make the mistake of calling this a game, aren't I? I think we all are.
I'm sure.
I think it was the introduction of this film's, let's say, unorthodox score, which I think is foundational in and of itself.
Yes.
And it's weird, really weird. I read up about the Vietnam scene in that apparently all of the actors involved in this went through like a multi-week boot camp, so as that when they filmed this scene, it would seem realistic and it wouldn't seem like it was a super scripted, artificial feeling scene. The weird part about that is it's at most, 5 minutes long? It seems like
and most of
weirdly, it's important for it as a framing device, but it seems like a lot of care was made for this Vietnam set piece, especially like the actual set. And, you know, it's ultimately 5 minutes at the start and then eventually a little bit at the end.
Most of it's them just talking.
Yep. And from what I have learned from this article I've been looking at, disturbing facts about the 1990 psychological horror film Jacob's Ladder, apparently that was not a scripted scene. It seems like they just let them riff, which is an interesting choice.
I thought it was good.
Sure.
They did good riffing, honestly.
Yeah. But
who wrote that article and where can you find it?
That is on, let me find it, 80skids.com from Matt P.
Okay.
Actually published last year, which is odd. I don't know why people are thinking about this movie from 1990.
Because it influenced so many other movies.
Yeah,
games
I
and
think
things.
that we can give shout outs to other people who have covered both the Silent Hill franchise, which is supposedly being rebooted soon after some multiple attempts to reboot the franchise in general. But Voidburger did a really good series looking at Silent Hill and its many influences and kind of how it, basically influenced an entire generation of horror games, especially in Japan. I think a lot of people are going back to this film just because it had an influence that goes unreported for the most part.
It influencing Silent Hill, and then Silent Hill influencing so many other things, and then it clearly influenced movies like The Sixth Sense, a lot of other films. So it's always a good one to go back to revisit. So this initial score, like that piano playing over the Vietnam set piece, we kind of get helicopters flying in, and it looks like a Rambo movie almost, or an action movie, were it not for the score letting you know that something's amiss. And that slow, somber piano kind of like you can see the influence there in Silent Hill games and in a lot of Japanese horror soundtracks kind of going forward, rather than having kind of a grating or loud or overtly horror score. It's more melancholy. It's going for unsettling and sad rather than going for just something's wrong. This movie does not scream at you very much. And they set that up from the start. And we also see in the Vietnam scene one of the first introductions of kind of the convulsing. So Ving Rhames, one of the soldiers in Jacob Singer's troop, just in the middle of this gunfight, starts foaming at the mouth and convulsing, like having a seizure, falls on the ground and seems to die with no contact with an enemy combatant. And that shaking is echoed throughout the film in a number of spots, but it's one of the clearest kind of influences. Your shaky monsters from other future games and stuff, a lot of it is kind of foreshadowed in that very first scene of Jacob's Ladder, and it'll play forward. So going to New York, we get one of the big tells, I think, in this movie. One of the first things that you see once Jacob wakes up on the train is an ad that says hell, and then it just, I think it's "you're in hell," or it might just say hell. And then
I think it's been vandalized to where it once said hello. It's kind of like Sin City is actually Basin City, but it's been, the sign that introduces it is been vandalized to hide that.
I thought it was, so it's an anti-drug ad.
Yes.
It's hell. That's what your life can be, doing drugs, but it doesn't have to be that way. Help is available day or night. And the hell is just giant and red. It's a drug hotline advertisement.
Can I ask how on point is this? Is this actually filmed on site, or was it secretly like Canada? Because occasionally, sometimes I can notice when it says we filmed this movie takes place in San Francisco. It's like I live in the California Bay Area. I can tell you filmed in Toronto, or so. My two New Yorkers.
That subway looks like a bad, shitty subway from the 90s. I'll say that.
Yeah, like if you, I remember watching The Get Down on Netflix, which is like set in earlier than this, and the subway was not great. They updated all of the subways in my lifetime, so it doesn't look like that anymore, but it sure does look accurate to the time.
Yeah, it's beaten up and graffitied, and the cars are kind of shitty in the way that they were in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if they shot on location. There are some scenes that don't look as on location, like scenes where he's outside being chased by cars and stuff. To be fair, I was not, like most of my time in the 90s in New York City were in the Bronx and Manhattan, not in Brooklyn. So I don't know if that's more accurate to Brooklyn, but the train stations look about right.
Okay.
So we
Good
get this very first scene, like it just says hell almost immediately after he gets there. Jacob then goes to a train car and asks another patron whether he's, missed his stop, and it's an old woman who just stares at him, just unblinking. And then as he walks by a homeless person asleep on the train, he notices what appears to be a tail moving underneath their jacket just before he gets off the subway. And then we get an abandoned subway, which I think in true Silent Hill 4 echoes this scene pretty directly. When there's a train station, there's a subway station level in that game, and he immediately tries to kind of exit, and one of the exits is closed, and so his only choice is to go across the tracks to the other side, where there's an open exit. And as he is kind of trying to cross, a train almost hits him, and we see kind of figures on the train all seeming to stare at him. And the last car, as he, ducks out of the way, there's a person on the back of the train with what appears to be like a smooth face, like this almost clay-looking face, who just like slowly waves at him as the train pulls away. And so I think the film very early on gives you transparent hints that something is amiss with this location.
There's also
go ahead.
The homeless person with the tentacle inside of him, which is why he darts out of the train. And that particular visual is a motif throughout the film, but it's also a motif that has been used repeatedly in Silent Hill. Like the evil tentacle from the You ended up looking it up, Gino, but the evil tentacle in the like dance scene, they just straight up carbon copied that as a boss in what, Silent Hill 3 or 2?
Origins has a monster called the Beast with two backs, which looks a lot like the monster from Jacob's Ladder in a later party scene. But I think this initial scene kind of sets the tone of is Jacob in the real world?
Sure.
And what is going on with some of the figures? Because he was almost hit by a train, which is a normal thing. I mean, he was on the train tracks, but every figure on the train, something was off. The woman who stares at him, the homeless man with his tentacle, the figures on the train look almost like spirits, and not that almost hit him. They look almost like spirits and don't look like regular people. And then we get, the sign very clearly talking about hell. There's another sign that says ecstasy as well in the train station. So we immediately see this called into question of what's real, what's not. And that kind of plays forward in a number of spots throughout this movie. So kind of looking at that thread, ZP, what was one of your takeaways from this choice? And then what are some other scenes in this film that really kind of brought that question forward for you?
It's not only the actual scenes, it's the fact that we have multiple breaks in terms of the narrative structure. We jump forward a lot. Like there are these massive leaps of time sometimes. So we go from that subway to he's waking up from bed to he's at work. And so these abrupt and quick juxtapositions between scenes and gaps of time also lead to this sense of like he's like teleporting himself almost as if he's in a fantasy or science fiction character, further kind of reinforcing the idea that this is not the real world. We're in the unknown world.
Yeah. He just ends up places.
Mm-hmm. It felt very Lost, like there are flashbacks and flash forwards where you're not quite sure what is the real world or not. You think that he is in the real world when he's with his girlfriend, and then we jump back and we have a flashback with his wife. And I'm sure if I hadn't been inundated with this kind of narrative structure in the past, 20 years, this would be very jarring for a viewer in the 90s.
Well, I ended up looking up the reviews for this movie when it first aired, and it was a bit of a funny experience, especially as I was reading some of them to Gino. One of the big problems that a lot of people had was that people were complaining about how, oh my God, it's just Deus Ex Machina after Deus Ex Machina. The most controversial scene being, and we'll talk more about it when we get there, when Jacob goes through a hospital and is rescued by a chiropractor, and there are multiple reviewers that say this is completely illogical. There's multiple breaks of continuity. It doesn't make sense. And it's like, that's the whole fucking point of the movie. How did you miss that? And yeah, I mean, it just goes to show, like, there are multiple times when I feel like this movie is really hitting it hard in terms of its symbolism, but the fact that actual paid, professionally trained editors of film criticism occasionally miss that whole thing. It's like, fuck, guys, we're all screwed. It's the end of the world. Art is dead.
So, what was a scene that stood out to you in terms of breaking between reality and kind of this monstrous other world? Did you want to call attention to any of them?
Oh boy. Do we want to get to the party scene?
We're not bound by linear storytelling. We're going over the themes.
Kind of like the movie.
Exactly. Before we get to that, I think we need to talk about the chiropractor that was mentioned, because there's some weirdness with him pretty early on.
Yeah, you're right.
He's like
sure does like Bible quotes.
Yeah, he's
Louis.
Really who played him? Do you know?
Danny Aiello.
Yeah. Who you might be familiar with. He seems like a nice guy. He's trying to help our protagonist out. He's got some back problems. if you know anything about drugs, you know that some psychedelics are like they like get stored in your spinal fluid or something.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
I
So-
did not make that connection. Wow.
Yeah. So this will come back up as we get deeper into the conspiracy aspect of this movie. But he's like cracking his back, and then he gets like these flashbacks to like his time in Vietnam. And he's like, "Oh, you're really working out some traumas there."
I had to make a deep adjustment on that one.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's one where he like the shot changes, and then there's a glowing light behind him. And our protagonist is like, "You kind of look like a overgrown cherub."
Yeah, Jacob says, you look like an angel, Louis, like an overgrown
Yeah.
cherub. Anyone ever tell
Yeah.
you that? Louis says, yeah, you, every time you see me.
Yeah.
Jacob says, you're a lifesaver, Louis, and Louis says, yeah, I know.
So there's definitely something going on with that guy. Who knows? Is he an angel? Probably. Seems implied.
Yeah, and this movie, I think, does a good job of jumping. So there are moments where Jacob seems to descend, and it's almost so Silent Hill, for those who have played it, there tends to be kind of 3 layers to Silent Hill in the games and in the movie, if you've watched the movie. There's kind of regular Silent Hill, which is an abandoned town. There's foggy Silent Hill, which there are monsters there, but not that many, and it seems like it's snowing all the time. And then there's kind of Hell Silent Hill, where everything gets rusty, it gets industrial. There's just a lot of chain link fence everywhere, a lot of rusted metal, a lot of blood on everything, and then it's Monster City when it's that Silent Hill. And this movie kind of operates in a similar fashion. Like you have moments where Jacob seems to be incredibly safe when he's with Louis, when he flashes back with his wife in his kind of old life. And it's worth saying, like, nothing about the movie tells you it's a flashback. Like, sometimes it just seems like he's just operating in a different reality. Like, he'll talk about how the things that were happening previously were like a bad dream, and he's just with his kids and his wife. And then he'll just cut straight back to, being in his apartment. So, like, he seems to go up sometimes where he's operating in an almost heavenly safe space. There's the normal kind of quote-unquote normal world where he's in New York. Things are amiss. There are demons around, but they're not always there. And then there's kind of snapping back to Vietnam where it's almost kind of, I would say that's the linear timeline in the film.
Yeah.
There's kind of a hell, a limbo, and a heaven element going on.
But which is which?
Exactly.
Which is which?
Mm.
I think the thing that I want to praise the film for, especially there are a lot of transitions, and the direction for those transitions is incredibly well done. Like, there are times when Tim Robbins' character, Jacob, he just big flash of light or an explosion, and then it's like doctor's lamp looking into his eyes or a car running quickly past him. The flashbacks, there are a lot of them, always seem to seamlessly transition, except when it's deliberately done in a way to kind of jut the audience, jut the watcher in a way that feels discordant.
So kind of talking more about the creatures. So I think one of the biggest influences that this movie kind of had on Silent Hill and on horror is the creature designs. So we get a lot of tentacles, we get a lot of kind of writhing flesh, almost Cronenberg-y, and like that initial set of monsters that we see in the train, we see a lot of kind of humanoid figures that are slightly disfigured. Like Jacob almost gets hit by a car at one point, and he sees the 2 people in the backseat of the car. One of them looks like almost they've got a clay face, a white clay face. Another person looks distorted, like they've got big eyes and a skinny little mouth. He goes to a party, and you mentioned that one. And at the party, there's in the fridge, there's I think it's a skull.
It's a pig's head, I think. something like that.
It's a skull.
Some sort
Yeah.
of shocking body horror, nonetheless.
There are like he moves kind of a towel or something off of what seemed to be maybe like a lamp or something, and it's just a cage with a raven in it. His girlfriend Jezebel, and we'll get to that, is dancing with someone, and as the dancing intensifies, the person she's dancing with seems to become a monster, just a writhing flesh monster.
Does she become a monster, or is she being attacked by a monster? Because
The
there's
person
like
she's
drawing
dancing
of
with
blood.
becomes a
Yeah,
monster.
she's getting attacked. It's a little upsetting.
But she's still
but-
dancing.
It's
Yeah.
a flesh monster, like
Oh yeah,
with teeth and like it's like
there's like a tail.
Tooth, tail, a wing, like wings, but like the wings look like they're a rib cage from like a cow or something. And then it culminates in like a spike shooting through her mouth and Jacob collapsing. And then he's revealed to have a huge fever. We also see, like, in that scene, there's a man kind of in the distance, and his head starts shaking incredibly fast. And ZP, do you want to explain, like, the shaking, how they
So
did
yeah, the notable thing about this film is that none of this film was used digital film. It was all filmed on camera and on film. One of probably the most the most ubiquitous features of this film is when there is a person with a typical kind of restraint from old school 1930s, 1940s insane asylums, like actual asylums where they believed in like the best way to treat someone that's going through manic depression is to completely restrain their bodies and their limbs and cover their eyes to force them to sleep. And you see this person with a face restraint over it, and he's shaking his head repeatedly, and it looks like it's horrifically fast motion. The way that they did that is that the director, Adrian Lin, filmed that person who did that in a low frame rate. So basically have the frame rate and then sped it back up to a normal frame rate. And it leads to this very blurry kind of odd look, but no post-production effects. Everything filmed in camera. So there was no like the editing process for this film was, I just can't imagine, must have been like very truncated, but it's probably the single most important like visual icon of this movie because it is an actual icon that is repeatedly used in almost every single horror video game that's set in creepy, spooky, insane asylum ever. Like the feature of the person shaking their head left and right, and it's blurry.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
go ahead,
oh.
Dan. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask. That guy did not seem to have legs. How did they do that?
They actually hired people who were
Okay,
disabled.
gotcha.
And that is going to come up when we go to the actual the hospital scene, but they actually hired people who were missing their limbs, which was a common technique, especially before digital film, before CG, is you would hire people.
I mean,
There's
honestly, get those paychecks instead of CGIing.
Do what you gotta. There's a quote here from Roger Ebert when he reviewed this film, which is germane to this. He says, "This movie was not a pleasant experience, but it was exhilarating in the sense that I was able to observe filmmakers working at the edge of their abilities and inspirations. Not every movie has to be fun," which I think sums it
It's
up.
a really good way to put it. This is a movie I would say I watched out of pure curiosity after watching, again, Voidberger's retrospective on Silent Hill. I would not go out of my way to watch this film other than, a curiosity to understand its legacy. It's kind of one of those films where there are times when it's a tough watch.
Yeah, this movie is unsettling, and it inspired a lot. And you can see like that shaking inspiration, the restraints the straitjacket monster, which is one of the most ubiquitous Silent Hill monsters, is just very much taken from
this movie.
some of these scenes.
The weird
the
thing,
monster that we
though-
see dancing at
Yeah.
the party also like seems to directly play into future Silent Hill monsters. So like you can see a lot of these characters. There's even in Silent Hill 1 there's like tiny people who have knives, like unsettling, but they look kind of like humanoids. That even I think you could say some of the spirits in this movie kind of evoke some of that.
It's interesting because even with this movie influencing a lot of other things, it seems like they were taking a lot like H.R. Giger, that sort of thing.
Yep.
From even further back. So the Alien.
Nothing's new.
Yeah, the Aliens franchise directly linked to Silent Hill.
Yep. So, you already brought up Louis. So I think another huge theme that's running through this that also kind of runs through the Silent Hill franchise is this movie evokes biblical themes all over the place to kind of raise the question, is Jacob alive? Is he in the afterlife? Is he dead? And a lot of the figures we see are named biblically as well. Jacob himself, his sons Eli, Jeb, and Gabe. So Gabriel, probably Eli, and probably Jebediah. We have his girlfriend, whose name is Jezebel. Do either of you know the biblical story of Jezebel?
I know that it is a biblical story.
I
don't
know
the
that it
specific
is
one.
a biblical story as well.
Let's see.
Okay, so Jezebel, and I was hoping one of you would know it, but let me just look it up. So she was the daughter of a king in the Book of Kings, and she basically she and her husband instituted the worship of Baal and Asherah. So
she's a false prophet.
yes, she is kind of the representative of false prophets. She is the stand-in. So Jacob's girlfriend, being named Jezebel, she is there kind of standing in for his wife Sarah, I believe is his wife's name. Sarah, again, a biblical name.
Also, yeah.
Abraham, I believe that's Abraham's wife, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so we get this kind of canonical, pure wife, and then this Jezebel, who Jacob is spending time with. And from the very first scene with her, Jezebel says, well, personally, I never went for church names. And then Jacob laughs, and he says, where do you think Jezebel came from? And she says, no one calls me that. And Jacob says, you're such a heathen, Jezzy. How'd I ever get involved with such a fucking ninny? Jezebel says, you sold your soul, remember? That's what you told me. And Jacob says, yeah, for what? Jezzy replies, a good lay. Jacob says, look what I got. And they both say, the best. So we immediately, this is one of the first scenes after Jacob gets back from the train station. And Jezebel also is frequently just topless for seemingly no reason. She's always getting dressed or getting undressed.
She's always changing or getting, it's an interesting choice.
So I think
this movie earned its rated R rating before it included nudity, and the general sentiment is once you get an R, you might as well take advantage of it.
Mm.
The reputation of horror films, even during the 90s, was that this is the movie we go sneak into so as that we can see boobies, like Scream Queens, that kind of stuff. Even if this is an art house kind of piece that's very much going for more than that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that the movie, she is topless because she is supposed to represent kind of this temptress, this character who is corrupting Jacob. He's got his real family, and then there's Jezebel, who is one of the first scenes. Jacob gets a bunch of pictures of his old family, and Jezzy takes those pictures and throws them in the incinerator and burns them because she says, I don't like things that make you cry. And so she burns them away. But it kind of raises the question of, what is her role here? What's Jacob's relationship with her? What's she doing? We also get, like you said, Louis, kind of this angelic chiropractor who shows up. We start seeing some of Jacob's friends from his past life in the military, but they have now all kind of started seeing things as well. that they call demons, and so we get kind of an overt biblical invocation. And what are I don't think there are any other like huge overt biblical themes.
I do want to point out at one point he's flipping through a copy of the Inferno from Dante.
Mm-hmm.
There's like the illustrated version of that book that I have. I believe that the reason they didn't use the title Dante's Inferno is because that would reveal the secret too quickly. It seems that they wanted something a little bit more subtle. So having your main character named a biblical name, you might as well stick with the Jacob's Ladder theme. And then they got to title a secret military project after it.
Which is probably the weakest part of the film, to be perfectly honest. The whole government conspiracy, evil nerve agent part of this movie.
Yeah.
And it's a significant part of the middle chapter of this film. It just feels completely unnecessary. And it honestly feels out of place because this is when you return to what Jacob perceives as the real world or the true world, even though there are multiple hints in between and throughout that he's not in the real world. But like, I think there are some really good performances, especially when Jacob interacts with his old platoon mates. But the underpinning of it being, we got experimented on and we got to find the truth, is not the best. And it's honestly clumsy at times.
Yeah. So we've got, the movie has this kind of underpinning of, Jacob maybe being tested, maybe being haunted by demons. There are all of these kind of biblical characters or biblical names around him. We get Christian iconography in a number of places. Like one of the soldiers that he meets with carries around a Bible and a crucifix. He says that doesn't help him with the demons at all. We even get some mysticism, like other kinds of mysticism, like a palm reader at the party scene reads Jacob's palm and says that his lifeline says that he's already dead, and she's like, I don't know, man. That's just what your palm says. We get a number of people telling Jacob he's dead.
Ah, that's so strange. I mean, they're spelling it out for you pretty overtly.
The first scene says hell. There's the scene in the hospital. Someone says he's dead, and we'll go in depth in the hospital because I think that's maybe the single most influential scene in the whole movie. So I feel like we should just like save that for the end. But like you said, ZP, there's other through line. Like there's the mystical and the spiritual element of what's going on with Jacob. What are the rules of this space? What's happening to him? That seem to be really in like kind of a Silent Hill sort of way. Like, you know, some of the most interesting parts are like, why are these people here? What's happening to them? And then there's the government conspiracy where they start talking about how all of the members of Jacob's platoon seem to be dying in explosions. He gets picked up at one point by two, I guess, agents who say he just couldn't keep his mouth
sucks.
Shut. Why don't you like that scene?
It's just the wackiness of everything about him getting kidnapped by the agents and the car careening down the street, and then it culminates with him getting robbed by Santa Claus. It's just too much.
I thought getting robbed by Santa was the funniest part of this movie. But maybe that's just because, like, in the next scene, he's getting wheeled into a hospital, and he's like, oh, who took your stuff? Where's your wallet? And he's like, Santa took it.
I got robbed by Santa Claus.
I have to find him. My kid's picture is in there. And they're like, oh, we gotta get this guy to the institution in our basement, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that this, like, the two very near-death scenes that we get in this movie, like, there's the scene where he has a fever, and he gets thrown in an ice bath, and Lewis Black shows up later, but he gets thrown in the ice bath, and he wakes up, and he's with his kids, he's with his wife in his original bed, and he's like, the window's open, it's too cold, and then it cuts back to him in this tub of like melted ice water with Lewis Black telling him he's just, a very lucky man to be alive. And then the hospital scene, similarly, like he has a near-death experience, and instead of going kind of up to a fonder memory with his wife, he goes down into a very unpleasant place. And I think that those kind of near-death experiences are where he has the closest brushes with the good and the evil that seems to be tearing at him. But ZP, what is your big takeaway from like the government conspiracy? Because I think that that's the scene, like that through line is what the movie's message seems to be, or what it seems to focus on, and you might have some more context as to why they went this direction.
It seems like the most, to me, the whole government conspiracy, evil nerve agent is one of the bigger reminders that this is a byproduct of the 90s. I think the director, and actually I watched it with the director's commentary, they talked about how they were inspired by the CNN report Valley of Death, which for those of you that don't remember, CNN reported about Operation Tailwind, which was a secret covert operation undertook during the Vietnam War. And CNN reported that they had it on good authority that sarin gas had been used on civilian populations. Eventually, the Pentagon did their own report and said, bullshit. And then basically CNN was caught with their pants down. It led to a huge scandal, but it did kind of lead to this weird period of the 90s to the early 2000s where, government conspiracy about using evil nerve agent or chemicals that take over your brain for, especially in the horror genre, a lot. It's a real clear, stark reminder of the 90s. The only other thing that I would say about it is that there's Jason Alexander's character. Like, This is just the most 90s part of this film, especially when Jason Alexander comes through.
Mm-hmm. It felt like they needed more, like, dialogue. Like, you know how in Jaws there wasn't any dialogue, and so they needed people to, like just start talking? It felt kind of like a thing to pad it out, almost, to make it, I guess, give it some legitimacy, and I guess distract from, like, what are these weird creatures that are going on?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, like, the movie, the very end credits kind of says, look, so the plot line with this, experimental drug thing, Jacob keeps almost getting run over by cars and almost exploded. And there's always this man with glasses and long hair who just shows up to save him from these near-death experiences. He shows up like 3 times, and he just like saves Jacob, then leaves. And I believe he's the same actor as the actor who we see saving him on the helicopter in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
But in Jacob's version of Brooklyn, he eventually pulls him aside and says, hey, we created this thing called the ladder. It's a chemical agent that brought out the animal in soldiers so that they would be better fighters. And we tried it on your unit, and when your unit had this drug used on them, they killed each other. Like, you didn't fight the Viet Cong, you fought each other, it drove you all mad. And there were no survivors, basically, or very few survivors.
I think that there's a really good quote by the producer of this film, which I'll just read it. It says, Vietnam was really a means to an end. It was a plot device rather than something that we were trying to make a huge issue of, which kind of just, to me, highlights one of the reasons why there are fans of this film who like to yada yada the whole evil chemical agent part of this story, sometimes going so far as to call it a red herring rather than an actual reality, or like it's an actual part of the story. Yeah, and I think that is the explanation for what is happening. And I mean, the movie ends with like a statement saying there's some evidence that we tried experimental drugs on our troops. Yeah. And so I think it kind of wraps this up too neatly, saying that, the twitching monsters are because he's on drugs. And like it does explain why Ving Rhames' character at the beginning of the movie starts having a seizure, but it's too neat. Like the interesting part of this film is the ambiguity of where he is and why things are happening. And when you
say, well, it's because he's dying and it's because he was on Vietnam drugs. It takes away a lot of the punch. The ambiguity, I think, is the best part, and I think similarly in the Silent Hill franchise, when those games are dealing mostly with the cult of Silent Hill and explaining how Silent Hill got the way it is, and
know what you're talking about.
The rules
when Silent Hill 4: The Room explains what is the room, that's the best part of that game.
Yeah.
Are we talking about the games or the movies? Because the movies do this hardcore.
They both do it. The
Okay.
games do it. The games do it to varying degrees. I think Silent Hill games are you can almost judge them by how much time do they spend on the cult of Silent Hill. The more they spend on it, the worse the game tends to be.
Right.
The more ambiguous they leave it, the better. I like when it's like a snipping here or there, and it just gives you a sense that something foul is going on, and that bad things have happened in this place. When you really do a deep dive, and like Silent Hill 4 spends a lot of time on the cult of Silent Hill, and that is one of the things that makes it so bad in spots. And I think that this movie similarly, like when they're talking about the government conspiracy and the drug, the ladder. I love Jacob's Ladder as a metaphor. I don't love Jacob's Ladder as a drug, And it's
he's
just too neat.
Ascending the steps into heaven. Why not,
Or climbing the steps down into hell. It's a great symbol. It's a bad physical object. So I think that's kind of the other main through line here. And with that, I think it's good to turn our attention to the most iconic scene of the whole movie, and probably the one that's been the most repeated throughout, subsequent films and games that have been influenced by this, and that's the hospital scene. So we mentioned, Santa steals Jacob's wallet, and after that he's taken to the hospital. He's gone to a mental hospital before to see a therapist, and we do see a corrupted nurse in that scene. Like she's got teeth growing out of her head or something.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's like a spike. Hat falls off. It's weird.
It's like teeth or something. It's gross. But this time he's just rushed into the ER for an operation. He tells them, I was robbed by Santa Claus, and he's almost immediately strapped to a gurney. He says that he's got a bad back, and the doctors largely ignore him, unlike Louis, who treated him with extreme care. And he is then wheeled away, and wheeled down a hallway that gets progressively worse. Yeah. The first hallway we see in there are empty rooms to the side. It's very dirty. It's very grimy. It looks like kind of the first layer of Silent Hill. The kind of snowy, dilapidated Silent Hill, abandoned town Silent Hill. One of the side rooms, there's a bike that's just spinning. Those games love abandoned bikes.
Mm-hmm. Smashed bikes, always good.
Especially when bike is used as metaphor for dead child.
Yeah, and we see in an earlier flashback, I forget if it's earlier or later, but we see Jacob's son, Gabe, get hit by a car, and his bike, mangled as a result. And the bike clearly just reappearing in this hospital calls into question, what's real, what isn't. We see kind of broken glass strewn on the floor. I think there's just an abandoned baby carriage as well. And Jacob, outside of Jacob's apartment also has just a ton of abandoned baby carriages and dilapidated stuff. This New York is gross. So as he keeps getting wheeled, we see shots of the wheels of the gurney, and the wheels are just spinning. It's an uneven gurney as well. They then kind of enter a section that's, how would you describe the section M after the dilapidated part?
Let me get the video up, because
it's with all
deformed
of the
bodies, and
they're straitjackets. So this one's folks in straitjackets.
So it's like a really grimy hospital-looking hallway. We see people banging their head against walls until they're bleeding. there are like chunks of meat on the ground.
That comes next. That's the third section.
There's also
okay,
the part where
soon.
like the deformed people, people
there's
with
like
deformities are crawling over a mesh.
grates over the hull, and they're just like someone feeding a baby.
There's a woman breastfeeding what appears to be a baby. There's a little person running, like writhing around in a diaper. There's like a man with missing limbs, like pulling himself around on his hands. And all of this is playing out on a chain link fence directly above Jacob. And then there are kind of glass windows on the side where you see people kind of convulsing, a guy banging his head till it's bleeding. There's a woman just lying on the floor in a straitjacket. So a lot of these themes kind of will show up in the Silent Hill games, especially like the man dragging himself along the floor with his arms.
Yeah.
And then we get the final section, which is where there's just fucking meat and arms and giblets all along the floor. It's bloody everywhere. And we get the shot of the man with his head just violently shaking with no legs. And
one of my favorite parts about this is the gurney like wheels like get stuck on some of these things. It's very visceral.
Yeah, and they just keep going.
Yeah, they just don't even seem bothered by it. It's a very chilling 30 seconds of video. Not even. Maybe
Also,
15.
the music during this scene is fantastic. The thumping, robotic, synthetic kind of music that plays here is so similar to everything that's been done with the Silent Hill music.
And we also see like the nurses go from like in normal nurse outfits to eventually they have like almost hazmat suits when they're walking through the blood and the viscera. And it terminates in Jacob in an operating theater. Jezebel shows up. There's a doctor just diabolically putting on gloves. Just disgusting how he puts on those gloves. And he's just already got blood on his coat. There's a bunch of people just staring at him. And he has a conversation with Jacob before he sticks a needle in his forehead, where the evil doctor says, "Where do you want to go?" Jacob says, "Home." Evil doctor says, "Home? This is your home. You're dead." Jacob says, "Dead? No, I just hurt my back. I'm not dead." The evil doctor says, "What are you then?" Jacob says, "I'm alive." Doctor says, "Then what are you doing here?" Jacob's like, "I don't know. This isn't happening." Then the evil doctor says, "Well, what is happening?" And Jacob says, "Get me out of here." And the doctor says, "There is no out of here. You've been killed. Don't you remember?" So this is the most explicit the movie gets. And after this scene, we get Louis kind of coming and rescuing him from the hospital and giving, I think, the most famous speech in the whole movie from Eckhart, who is a German philosopher.
German theologian and philosopher.
So Louis' speech is, Eckhart saw hell too. You know what he said? He said, "The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life, your memories, your attachments. They burn them all away. But they're not punishing you," he said. "They're freeing your soul." So the way he sees it, if you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look at it. That's all. So don't worry, okay? So Louis is like very clearly this ethereal being, kind of. He is the nice angel to Jezebel and the evil doctor's kind of demon. But all of them are trying to get Jacob to let go and die.
The thing that's kind of funny to look back in hindsight, Jacob's Ladders, a majority of its horror is psychological and the slow build up in terms of realizing that Jacob is dead and he needs to let go. The actively like visceral horror scenes they're there, but they are so quick sometimes that you could almost miss it if you blink.
It's
during
like 5 minutes and 2 hours.
So like, I ended up counting it. I ended up counting this. The subway scene at the start is 4 minutes and 6 seconds. The car monster scene is 16 seconds. The dance scene is about 3 minutes 22 seconds, and the hospital scene is 3 minutes and 12 seconds.
Yeah.
And this leads to about 15 minutes of pure visceral horror. And the hospital scene in particular, multiple people who have worked on the Silent Hill franchise said, we saw this scene and that is the scene that inspired us. It's crazy to think that less than like 15-ish minutes of footage from this film inspired what is ostensibly a generation of Japanese horror games.
Literally 30 years of games.
Literally. Like 30 years. And with Silent Hill, it's like 3 minutes of a 2-hour film.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll see, like, Silent Hill 2 specifically, James Sunderland? I believe it's James Sunderland. JS, Jacob Singer, James Sunderland. James has a jacket that is it's Jacob's jacket. I believe they reproduced this scene in Silent Hill 2, specifically the hospital scene. So a lot of Silent Hill 2, I believe, is the most directly referencing Jacob's Ladder of all the films, of all the games. I mean, so I think we'll see a lot of echoes here.
Yeah,
as we play through the game.
Mm-hmm.
So any closing thoughts? I mean, the movie ends with Jacob kind of ascending into heaven, and then cuts to him dying on a hospital bed in Vietnam.
The one thing that I really liked about the end is how the film really lingers with his corpse in that military doctor's tent, that triage tent. It just sticks with that shot for like what feels like a minute, but it's really maybe 20 seconds. It just stays with a static medium shot. And it's just kind of like, yeah, he's dead. Yeah. This is the journey. It's over. It's not romantic.
Yeah, like I don't know if it was because of this movie or like in the same vein as it. There was a short story I read that was similar to this. I believe it was about a guy who was shot during a bank heist, and then the rest of the story is him like reliving playing baseball in his childhood. So there's like, we're always trying to come up with what happens when you die, how long it takes to work through all of this stuff. So seeing this as like kind of a pure form of that, genre is interesting. I wish I could think of the name. I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, so yeah. I mean, I think that this definitely, that final scene when they make it very clear that for Jacob, it was this world-spanning conspiracy. There, you see him like studying witchcraft or like reading about witchcraft, and he's got these demons. He's got this entire internal life. He's going to sue the government, and then to the outside world, he's just yet another man dying in Vietnam, and is just unexceptional. It's a real powerful juxtaposition from the scene, like the triumph of Jacob going up the stairs with Gabe, to a flat line and a doctor just taking off gloves and walking away. So, unfortunately, Jacob's Ladder is not the only film named Jacob's Ladder.
Oh, right.
Fuck. Why did you have to do this to us, Gino?
We gotta talk about this.
As a fun treat, I watched Jacob's Ladder, the remake in 2019, which boasts a what rating on Rotten Tomatoes, M?
A grand total of 4%.
4%. A movie so good it didn't come to theaters.
That's out of 100.
They said,
Thousands.
No, we'll send this straight to video and then straight to Netflix.
Is it on Netflix?
It is. That's where I watched it.
Oh.
I watched all of it. How far in did either of you get?
15
I got
minutes.
about 20-ish minutes. I
wish.
You saw the entire thing, so tell us, does it get better?
So, it's a hideous film. Remember when I said the best part of Jacob's Ladder is the ambiguity and the spiritual nature of the film, kind of the ethereal quality, what's going on with Jacob, what do these monsters represent? It's a puzzler, it's a thinker.
The whole thing of the movie, yes?
Well, except those puzzler parts, the parts where you're wondering what's real, what isn't, the
Right.
parts where it's like it's a government conspiracy, he's on drugs, that part's not so good.
Mm-hmm.
So this movie, 2019 Jacob's Ladder,
They got rid of the plot of the drugs, correct? They decided to go all in on the.
No,
No?
they said, what if all the symbolism was stupid? What if instead it was all about the drugs?
Mm-hmm.
But what you
Well,
understand
I mean-
is it's not Vietnam, it's Afghanistan.
Of
So,
course.
oh man, that's right. So what you're saying is that when you compare in terms of the trajectory of the Silent Hill franchise, is that the remake for Jacob's Ladder is pretty on brand.
Yes,
Oof.
it is. This is the Silent Hill
Origins.
Is it Downpour?
Downpour, sure.
What's the one? Nah, Homecoming. It's the Homecoming.
That's the action game. If
That's
I
the bad
recall
action game. But yeah, the story follows Jacob. They've recasted the movie to have a almost all black main cast, and that was kind of its calling card. So like Jesse Williams of Grey's Anatomy fame plays Isaac, Jacob's brother. This movie has a brother. He's got a brother in this one.
Sure.
Cool.
And
Sure.
Jacob, both of them went to Afghanistan, and we see that Jacob, like, his brother Isaac shows up, and he's operating on him to save his life in Afghanistan, but he freaks out because he can't do it. He can't operate on his own brother, man. And then his brother dies in Afghanistan. But wait, Jacob's brother comes back from the
What?
dead. Yeah, he's back.
Why?
So Jacob, one of the guys on his brother's platoon shows up and is like, "Look, you gotta help your brother, man. You gotta come to the ladder." And he's like, "What do you mean?" "Well, we found this. It's a literal ladder." He goes down a ladder to go to a subterranean series of tunnels underneath the streets of Atlanta. Also, it's Atlanta
What?
instead of Brooklyn.
Fuck.
And
What?
there's an underground encampment of homeless vets that are all living underneath the tunnels of the subway. And Jacob goes down there to help his brother, and he finds his brother. And it turns out the ladder is both a literal ladder to go down into the tunnels, but also there's a drug called the ladder.
Oh God.
And the
Oh,
drug-
fuck.
The drug
Make him stop.
It's for vets. So a good drinking game of the remake is drink every time they say the vets,
Uh-huh.
our vets. He turns out the ladder's for PTSD. It gets rid of the bad memories and replaces them with good memories.
Mhm.
And so Jacob goes and he finds his brother strung out on the ladder, and he takes him home, and then we get some cutting with like cuts and scenes that don't seem to make sense in true Jacob's Ladder fashion. There are very few monsters in this movie. Like there's an old woman who's real creepy, and I think that's one of the only monsters you see in the whole film is this creepy-eyed woman.
Okay.
We do get vets foaming at the mouth and then dying.
Mhm.
And so the twist is Jacob is the brother who got wounded in Afghanistan. His brother Isaac's the doctor, and Jacob has been strung out on the ladder the whole time.
Whoa.
And the drug has been making him think he lived his brother's life. He was the doctor who married the woman who he always wanted and came home a hero instead of the guy who led his troops directly into an ambush.
Uh-huh.
Does it end with? Does it at least have the same ending, or did they change it to be happy?
So Jacob's alive and so is Isaac. They're both really alive. They both came back from Afghanistan. Jacob's just got PTSD.
They managed to remove the one good thing
I
about
let you
the
talk.
movie.
Wait a sec.
Okay.
Because I need to tell you about a scene where Jacob, so in the beginning of the movie, he's a doctor, he's a surgeon, and like one of these surgeons is like, "Jacob, you okay?" And then it turns out later on, after we learn that he's on a drug trip, she's a prostitute who he's having sex with, and she's a weird angel woman who gives him his ladder drug that makes him feel better. And so there's a weird gratuitous sex scene in the film. And then after that, it turns out that there's a pharmacist at the hospital that Isaac and / Jacob works at, who's making this stuff in an abandoned facility in Atlanta. And he's just operating an entire lab by himself and giving drugs to the vets. He's using drugs on our vets. And Jacob and Isaac go to shut him down, so he stops giving the vets the drugs. And he says, "I'm going to shoot you, Isaac. Don't you call the cops, man." And then Jacob jumps in front of Isaac and gets shot. And then he falls through. He tackles the bad guy through a window after getting shot, and then they both die on the street. So he's not been dead the whole time. Like, the whole twist.
And that's the ending?
That's the ending. He gets shot, he stops the evil conspiracy, and then he dies on the street. And then we see him walk in, like, a field afterwards.
Okay.
So it was all really happening, except the main character was really the brother.
I have so many questions.
But what if I told you it was also poorly told?
Okay.
And edited.
Good. I'm glad.
Now how much would you pay? Is it $0? Because that's what I paid.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for this movie, and it says in the development section, according to the Hollywood Reporter, the producers are looking to make something more akin to an homage and not mimic the original. The plan is to contemporize the story with new situations and characters, but still maintain a story that examines issues and poses existential questions.
Well, you see, they're addicted to drugs.
Yeah.
But the drugs take your... to quote Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, it takes all your bad feelings and turns them into good feelings.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good film. Don't watch the remake. The remake did not inspire anyone.
Yeah, this sounds
it's
bad.
Not, it's a bad movie. It's a bad horror movie. It's not scary. It's got like one jump scare because someone just like says something loud. The monsters, actually there are some monsters. It's just people with fucked up faces.
Uh-huh.
They got monster faces. But they use guns, which is
defeats the purpose of this being a slow atmospheric horror film.
Yeah, it sounds like an action movie with some psychological horror.
There's no creatures, really. Like, it's just people with fucked up faces.
Oh, tell me more about the use of CG. I googled this.
Yeah, they CGI the faces to make them fucked up.
Oh, this looks awful.
Okay, hold on. Let me Google this. Jacob's Ladder 2019.
Gotta put the word 2019.
CGI.
This looks bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's the monster. There's the monster. There you go. Are you seeing the creepy old lady?
Yep.
That's her.
Okay.
I'm seeing this decomposed CG face. That looks bad.
Yep. Those are the monsters. So from a movie that did all practical effects and made it all feel real to a movie that uses almost nothing but CGI and makes it all feel fake. So yeah, don't watch that movie. I watched it so you don't have to. Fuck that movie.
Do you feel like if you were to remake a movie, you would want it to be an homage, or would you want it to be an updated version of that movie that maybe made it a little bit better? I'm just taking a poll.
ZP, you go first.
Could you say this again?
If you were to remake a movie that was kind of inspirational to a lot of people, would you want it to be an homage to that movie, or would you want it to be an updated version of it?
Homage.
Really?
I would want an homage, just because the chances, like, what are you going to add, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
that's true.
You need a good reason to do a shot-for-shot remake, and sometimes it's because technology has come further, and you can do some things better, or, like, you might do a little bit of a twist, but largely do shot-for-shot, and change the context of that original film. But I think an homage, like, the idea of Jacob's Ladder, I think, leaves a lot of room to play around. They just chose the worst way to do it. They just chose to remove all the interesting parts.
They chose a way that left no one satisfied.
Well, you see, the baby in this movie is also named Gabriel, so it makes you think.
The best way I would put this, The Fly, The Thing, the 1988 version of The Blob, they are the exceptions to the remake rule. They are the exceptions.
Yes.
Because they're good?
They're good. They're
Oh,
very
okay.
good.
I haven't watched them.
Oh, wait, you haven't watched? Oh, okay. Nope.
You should watch The Thing. It's really good.
You should watch The Fly as well.
It's gross.
The Fly is gross. The Thing is also gross, but it's very good. So yeah, I think that covers our deep dive of Jacob's Ladder. So in a few short weeks, we'll be playing Silent Hill 2, and hopefully, this added context will help frame that game and give us a little bit more understanding of where that game's coming from and how it's doing what it's doing. So this was the first time you watched Jacob's Ladder. What was your final opinion of the film as a film? Because we've really been talking about it more as a artifact to study.
Yeah. As a film, not something I would watch again, just because I feel like, well, actually, let me not say that, because I feel like you would want to watch it one more time just to see all this stuff in the background that you might not have noticed the first time around. That was strange. Kind of like The Sixth Sense or something like that. But as Roger Ebert said, it is not a fun movie. Kind of doesn't have the entertainment factor that you want, but it's a pretty good film. That's where I'm at with it.
And ZP, did you have a takeaway for this as a film?
I actually got more out of this after a second viewing. I think that's
that's
a
what I
good sign. That's a good sign of a quality made film. I don't think I want to watch it again, but I don't mean that as an insult to the film. It's a lot. And I think you got to be in the right mindset. If you're looking for a traditional spooky film, you might want to look elsewhere.
No, it's just there to creep you out.
It's worth a viewing when you're in the right mindset.
Yeah, my takeaway, this is the third time I've seen it. So I saw it once a few years ago, and then once a few weeks ago, and then once yesterday to prep for the podcast. I definitely notice more things every time you see it. You notice more of the posters. I didn't notice that the dude who saves him from the car accidents and the explosions, that guy is the guy from the helicopter. Seeing actors playing, I'm pretty sure that that's the case, that it's that guy playing multiple roles. So you definitely pick up on more of those things, and especially when the lines are super on the nose. When there's ambiguity and questions the first time, you might dismiss some of the line reads, and actually the script is very deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
And you pick up on that the second watch. So yeah, if y'all have any suggestions for other works that kind of were very influential on games, feel free to write in at deeplistenspod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We have our comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. You can also support the show on patreon.com/deeplistens and get access to our Discord. We'll be looking for other opportunities to do something like this when a game is appropriate. Say, if we were to do Deadly Premonition, maybe we should watch a few episodes of Twin Peaks. Perhaps. Maybe. Who's to say?
Who's to say you'll ever end up playing Deadly Premonition?
I've
Who
played
knows?
some of it.
Gino might pick it.
I've played. I own it. I love that it was $30 new or $20 new for the Xbox 360. They're we can't charge someone $60 for this.
It's almost like there's already a well-known video retrospective of Deadly Premonition that said everything that needs to be said about that game.
That's true. We're probably not going to pick it, but that's just an example. I'm sure there are other films or other games that were influenced heavily by other forms of media. I'm sure we could have watched The Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones and then talked about Dragon Age, because damn if that isn't on the nose. Well, thank you, ZP.
Gino's lying to himself. Final Fantasy VI has the best intro in a Final Fantasy game. Don't listen to his fake news. Stand by me and Jeff, the right side of history.
We haven't talked about FF6 yet. Thank you, Em.
Thank you. Looking forward to talking about FF6 sometime.
And thank you, listeners. Till next time. Peace.